everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited today. We are here to talk about the year 1999 in film. This was when I was 18 years old. That's very, very fun, very formative time period in my life. So it's going to be fun to talk about. And I'm Rachel, and I'm joined by my friend Conrado today.
I am here. Rachel,
Yes.
do you or do you not want to know how young I was in 1999?
I'm going to be very, very depressed. What, how much of a wee lad were you in 1999?
I think I was 7 years old.
Okay. Not as maybe more formative. If you listen to the Up series. Take a man at 7 and you'll find a boy at 7.
Not
You'll
a lot of
find
the
a
movies on
man.
my list.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, not a lot of the movies on my list I saw when I was 7. So a lot of them I saw later because
Yeah.
they wouldn't have been appropriate.
Right. Yeah. So it was my first year in college in 1999, and 98 to 99, that school year was my first year in college. And we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about the duds. I saw a lot of movies that year, and the I saw a lot of bad movies because what would happen is there was a dollar theater right near campus, and they had they would always manage to sell out of the ones that everybody really wanted to go see. And so then we'd be like, okay, well, let's see this one. And usually that was a terrible idea because usually the ones that weren't sold out were awful movies. And so I saw a lot of really big clunkers in 1999. Plus, we'll talk a little more about it. I had one of the biggest disappointments of my movie-going career in
Okay.
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
pretty exciting.
That's a bit of a glimpse at
Yeah.
of the old past for the young ones. Time before you could reserve your seats online, you just had to show up at the theater and hope that it wasn't sold out.
Right. Exactly. That's very true. And so, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the year as a whole, and then we'll dive into our list. I just want to briefly talk about the Oscars for 1999 because I'm just not into any of the movies at all.
Same here. 1999. Let's just get it out of the way. I want to say, famously known as a great year for American movies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's podcasts dedicated to the year 1999 movies. There's books. There's a lot of stuff that's been going around the internet because it's obviously been 20 years about how great a year this was for movies. I usually have a bunch of foreign films when we do this list on my top 10. This time I have a lot of American movies because it was really a really great year. At the Oscars, not so much.
Right. And I used to get so much hate because I've never been a fan of American Beauty. It's not for me. I just think it's super pretentious, and I don't really love the message. And I just think like the whole idea of stifling suburbia is just so lazy, in my opinion. It's not an interesting observation to me, and I just the floating grocery sack and it's not for me. I don't like it. But I've ever since the Kevin Spacey downfall, I've gotten less
even more so
that.
Yeah,
But I just don't care.
there's just much better ways of, like you say, talking about suburbia in more creative ways. I can think of, like, Edward Scissorhands or something like that, which
Right.
does it with such originality. And there's much better ways of exploring, I think, middle-age crisis, masculinity, men, which I'll be talking about maybe later as we go into our movies. But yeah, American Beauty, as far as I'm concerned, also a stinker.
Yeah, and I also am not a big fan of Cider House Rules, which is the big winner.
Never seen it.
And then the other two, as far as acting, was Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry, which I haven't seen, and Angelina Jolie in Girl Interrupted. So I haven't seen that either.
Yeah, I haven't seen them in a while, but yeah.
But I mean, the only real winner for me in that year was we'll talk about is All About My Mother. That won for best foreign film.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Oscars.
Yeah, not a lot of, even in the nomination. I mean, there was a lot of stuff for The Matrix, which is cool in the technical categories.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's true.
and some of the nominations are pretty exciting. I think we can talk more about them as we talk about the movies that we picked, because
All
some of
right.
my movies did get a couple nominations.
Yeah. So the top 10 at the box office is an interesting group. So number 10 was the Blair Witch Project, which is a movie that it kind of impacted me because the Burkittsville, where it's set in Maryland, was about 15 minutes away from where I grew up. And so people were really, really coming. People really believed it. It was a thing, and it's definitely more well known for the phenomenon than for the movie itself. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
interesting thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of that movie, but definitely a very influential movie in the way it kickstarted, independent cinema. It was such a small budget, like I think a couple
Yeah,
$1,000s, and making, being number 10 for the year, and then the found footage horror trend and all of that kind of can be traced back to this movie.
yeah, and people really did believe it. I remember people coming. It
Another,
was really
yeah.
intense.
The
Yeah,
other thing is internet marketing, right? Which was very
yeah.
important for that movie. One of the first movies to do so, and create all these urban legends around itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So then number 9 is Runaway Bride, which is fun enough for a little romantic comedy. Then number 8 was The Mummy, which I actually enjoy. I think that's a fun.
This is the Brendan Fraser movie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for like a pulpy, uh, old school kind of adventure movie. I think it's fun. I definitely thought about it on my list. Then Big Daddy, which in retrospect, it's not the worst from Adam Sandler, but
Hmm.
it was it, it's not the best either. That's for sure. And then Tarzan was next. Then The Matrix, and I was really shocked that the next one was so high. It's Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, which is a movie I hated. I haven't seen it in years, but not my style of humor. But I was shocked it was beat The Matrix. I would not have guessed
Huge
that.
hit. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I think it's one of the few movies that made. I don't know if this is true. I might be talking out of my butthole here, but I think it's one of the movies that made more in its opening weekend that the previous movie did in its entire run. A sequel.
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge jump from the first to the second. I think
Mm-hmm.
because of VHS and rentals and that sort of
Oh,
thing.
interesting. Yeah. So then Toy Story 2, and then The Sixth Sense. And then your number 1 at the box office was my biggest disappointment of my life was Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And I had gotten super pumped, because I love Star Wars, but also because they had done the re-release of the original trilogy, and that was going to see A New Hope, which has always been my favorite. I know that's unpopular opinion, but I love New Hope. It's just like such a fun Western in space, and it just makes me cheer. I really think it's a great movie, and I going to see A New Hope in the theater is still one of the best experiences I've ever had at the cinema. It was just so much fun, and I had gone to see all 3 of them in the re-release, and even though special editions, it was just such a fun experience, and I was so excited for a new one. Oh my gosh, it was great to just be part of that excitement, And
Hmm.
then I saw it, and it wasn't great. I was disappointed.
Were you disappointed from the very beginning? I
Oh
feel,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. I was
yeah,
right at that age that it would have been
right.
it. And yeah, it was slow. I didn't like Jar Jar from I was not a fan. And then I really hated the second one. I disliked the second one so much that I didn't see the third one, Revenge of the Sith, until before Force Awakens. I really disliked that second movie. Yeah, but the first one was Phantom Menace was very disappointing for me.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I was 7 years old, so I loved Phantom Menace. I think I saw it 3 times in theater or something.
Yeah, that's funny. And so that's the box office. And so the duds for that year, this, because like I said, I went to the theater and would just see whatever was there. My least favorite movie I've ever seen is from 1999. And the only two movies I've ever walked out of were from 1999.
Okay, is one of them
Yes.
your least favorite is one of the ones you walked out of?
Yes. So the two of my least favorite movies are the two that I walked out on. One is called Superstar with Molly Shannon, and I just Will Ferrell basically plays kind of a version of Jesus, and I just thought it was so offensive and so awful and everything, but not even just that, but it was just so not funny at all. And I just was like, forget it, I'm done. So I hated that movie. And then I saw the movie Drop Dead Gorgeous, which in fairness is a dark comedy, and those are not my thing in general. But I this is my least favorite movie I've ever seen. I hated it.
Wow.
I thought it was so mean spirited and so just cruel, and I didn't think it was funny. And I actually was on a date when I saw it, and I said,
Wow.
"This is I." There once they get to a scene where one of the characters for their talent show does a mock crucifixion to like a prayer from Madonna, and I was like,
Right.
I'm done. I'm done. And I said, sorry, you can meet me in the lobby, and I left. And so yeah, there you go.
What did he do? Did he leave with you?
He and it was a double date with one of my
Oh,
friends, and so they all left. And so yeah, it was not for me.
yeah, definitely. I don't know much about Superstar. Only that it exists. But Drop Dead Gorgeous definitely has some sort of cult following that I've heard about before. I haven't seen it though.
Yeah, it has a lot of, it's like Amy Adams is in it, and a lot of people that people like that would go on to have big careers. It's just not my kind of humor. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so that's memorable. Other stinkers, there was a terrible Bond movie in 1999, The World Is Not Enough, where they tried to sell us Denise Richards as Christmas Jones, the nuclear physicist.
Mm-hmm.
Scientist. That's memorable. And then Message in a Bottle, which is a terrible Nicholas Sparks movie. The only good thing about that movie is it has Paul Newman in a pretty good performance, but it's really bad. And then Wild Wild West was
Oh
a
yeah.
huge dud in every way. For some reason, Hollywood just cannot seem to get steampunk right and make it fun. Every time they've tried, it's been a disaster, pretty much. And
Yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
yeah. And then the place that I actually saw this movie in theater, at the drive-in theater, is Baby Geniuses.
Oh, the infamous. A movie so bad that not even I, as a 7-year-old, were willing to give it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
I was like, this movie stinks.
Yeah, it was so bad. Because when you go to a drive-in, usually there's two movies that you go to see, and we were at the drive-in, and I I think maybe it was Tarzan or something like that. I can't remember the actual good movie that was part of the double, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember this one's Baby Genius is starting, and we were all just like, "What is this? What is this? What?" my god.
Definitely.
So that's the duds of the year. Oh, yeah. And so the Rotten Tomatoes, this is the best reviewed of the year is American Beauty, Election, being John Malkovich, Three Kings, The Straight Story, and then a movie that if I forgot about, but if I had remembered, I would have probably put it in my top 10 because I do really love it. It's so bizarre and crazy. Is Mr. Death, The Rise and Fall of Fred A. Luker Jr. It's by
Ah,
the great Errol Morris, and it's a disturbing movie on many, many levels. But he's an incredible documentarian, and he always does really strange movies and strange subjects, but it's a really good.
definitely.
It's good. And then All About My Mother, The Insider, Iron Giant, and Toy Story 2.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Lots of movies that I think we'll be talking about later.
yeah. Yes. So there we go. That's kind of the year as a whole. And so let's dive into our lists. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So,
All right.
yes. So number 10 for me on my list is controversial amongst fellow Austinites like myself. This is Mansfield Park, which is a book that is my favorite of Austen, but it has some interesting stuff. And the movie definitely takes some risk in the narrative, which is what people don't like, but I like
Mm,
it. Frances O'Connor, I like as Fanny, and I think it. I like Johnny Lee Miller is always a winner for me, and I like the fact that it goes to some darker places. I like that it takes the risks, so it's something I enjoy.
all right. I have not seen it, but I've been interested in it, and I've heard before that Frances O'Connor is really great in the lead role.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely curious to see it. So it decides to go darker than the novel. Is that what the controversy is?
Yeah, like it addresses at certain points addresses the slavery, it addresses some darker aspects that they weave into the script.
Yeah,
And I was fine with that. I liked it, but I understand that other people didn't like it. So,
that sounds interesting.
yeah,
Definitely gonna check it
it's
out.
good. It's it's I guess because the novel isn't my favorite, I'm fine with a little experimentation on it. So.
All right.
hmm I mean, she basically it's just there are two parts of it that don't age super well in the novel, which most of her novels are timeless in my opinion. But the whole controversy of them doing a play that was really outlandish at that time just doesn't quite hold up now. It's hard
Mm.
to kind of and then also she I mean, I guess this spoiler alert, but she 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 kind of marries or falls in love with her cousin, which is a little awkward in modern times. And it's not even just her cousin, it's like the person that she grew up with.
Okay.
Until since she was a little girl. So it's a little weird. But it's a different time.
Yeah, but I was gonna say Downton Abbey had a big, cousin Matthew and Lady Mary were,
That's true.
was
I
one of
mean,
the big romantic couples of her times.
that's true, but that was a very loose definition of cousin.
Yeah, it was kind of a distant relative, right?
Yeah, they would call. But yeah. But anyway, I like it, and I like this version. So
All
yeah,
right.
yeah. What do you have at 10?
My number 10 is The Iron Giant, which I think we're going to talk about later in
Yeah,
the episode again. So I'm just going to say I really love this movie. It's uh, very sweet and lovely and, has great ideas. It's really well done. And it's a great debut from Brad Bird, who I think is one of the best animators living and working
yeah.
today. So, yeah.
No doubt about it. For sure, you'll see that definitely very high up on my list.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
so number 9 for me is The Matrix. And some
Uh-huh.
people might be shocked to have this so low on my list. But I do think that the fact that those 2 sequels were such clunkers, I think does bring it down a little bit
Hmm.
for me. But I do really, I love martial arts, and I love the creative fights in the movie. I think it's at least trying to present something that's interesting, that makes you think, and I appreciate that. Keanu Reeves is kind of flat, but is fine, serviceable in the role, and it's just so fun and yet tries to make you think. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Um, Also, incredibly influential movie from 1999, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, in a lot of ways, both in exciting and maybe controversial or not so great ways, also in the way that people have adopted the idea of the red pill for, like men's rights activists and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
People online. But definitely a watermark of blockbuster cinema, right? And
Yeah,
kind
for
of
sure.
inventive and exciting, and in a way that is very rare to see ever, really, and especially nowadays. I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't really think of the last time a movie has been as influential, as successful, and as original as The Matrix. Um, you know,
Yeah, I
on that
mean,
level.
yeah, some people might say like The Dark Knight or something,
But
but
not as original because it's based on
that's
previously
true.
published material, so it's really, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was heavily influenced by things like Ghost in the Shell and other properties, but yeah, the whole I don't know, Thinking Man's blockbuster, I think, made it really
Mhm.
unique and something that people wanted to talk about, which is always the
Yeah.
most fun when you can go see a movie and people are like, oh, did you see it this way? Did you see it this way? The last time that really happened, as far as a positive kind of, what did you think happened? What do you think the ending means? For me, at least, was probably Inception. That it kind of
Yeah, that
generated
would
that kind of
be,
discussion.
yeah, definitely. That would be probably the closest that I can think of, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's really fun to me. So, what do you have at number 9?
My number 9 is the movie Election, directed by Alexander Payne, about a election for student president at a high school. And it's sort of a teacher played by Matthew Broderick who has a particular vendetta against the will-be class president played by Reese Witherspoon.
Mhm.
Her name is Tracy Flick in the movie. Um, it's a satire. Have you seen this movie, Rachel?
I started it, but it was a little too R-rated for me. But yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. It's definitely a dark comedy and a satire of politics. It's also, I think, a really, really interesting movie in terms of how it sort of doesn't really side with any of its characters, which maybe makes it like a little, darker than some people might want it to be, and a
Mhm.
little more complicated. I think, and I think it says a lot about the way politics work. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it's one of the best movies that I've seen about like the sort of like personal uh, grudges that play a role in who do we let win an election and what are the things that drive people to vote for someone and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Reese Witherspoon, I think it's great in this movie in
Mhm.
where it's basically her breakout role, I would say, as Tracy Flick. And I don't know, I just think it's very
Cool.
funny
Mhm.
and very poignant in a lot
Yeah.
of ways.
Cool. Yeah. So my number 8 choice is Fantasia 2000. And I this movie is not perfect. I don't like the celebrity intros. It's not Fantasia to me. As far as it turns it into sort of a TV special as far as these celebrity intros, but the animation I think is beautiful. I particularly love Rhapsody in Blue. I think that whole segment is just great. And I love Fantasia. It's one of my favorite movies. So to get to see a new update of Fantasia, to get to see it on the IMAX back in the day was really great. And I really I just love I love animation, and it was just a cool thing to have back.
I feel like people see it as a bit of a flop in some ways, or something that was like an experiment, didn't quite work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Would you say that that's true? That's the impression that I
Yeah,
get.
I
People,
think so, because of the celebrity introductions, and just the terrible puns, and just that whole part of it, I think kind of lowers it. And it was something that I don't think I think kind of came and went. And at the time they had, I don't know if it was exclusively in the IMAX, but they had it was kind of like an under the radar Disney film in a way.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like people often forget about it too when they
Mhm.
talk about Disney movies.
Yeah. And I love the Firebird sequence. I think that was beautiful. I the Rites of Spring with the whales I wish it wasn't as CGI heavy, but I still think it's pretty. And it's hard because you're comparing it to one of the biggest achievements in film history with the original. Even if some people maybe think it's boring, you can't be denied it's one of the great achievements in the history of film, is the original Fantasia, and so that's always tough. But originally they were planning on Fantasia being a series that they did every so often, and so it was fun to have it back.
Definitely, and even if it's if it's not like the masterpiece that Fantasia, the original Fantasia is, it's a very exciting experimental way of looking at animation that we don't really get that often in mainstream.
Yeah.
Like movies that are released in theaters nationwide. So um, I think it's an exciting movie, and I think some segments are better than others, but that's to be
Yeah.
expected. And the ones that are great, and the ones that are not so great are at least very interesting in the animation and the styles that they're trying to go for. So I would be, yeah. I kind of wish that it had been a bigger hit, because I would really love to see more movies like Fantasia come out of
Agreed.
Disney
Yeah,
and
I'm kind of
Disney.
hopeful that maybe that might be something they could do with Disney Plus. That might be cool. But who knows? But yeah, it's a especially Rhapsody in Blue is just something I love. So so what is your number 8?
My number 8, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Have you seen this movie?
I did.
You did? You're not a fan, but let me tell you about it. The
Okay.
Talented Mr. Ripley, based on the novel by Patricia Highsmith, and written and directed by Anthony Minghella, who is a director that I don't usually like. He's done The English Patient and Cold Mountain, both movies that I don't really like at all. But this movie, I think it's so great. It's Matt Damon plays this guy, Tom Ripley, who is like the sort of working class pianist, basically, who is confused for a sort of high class Ivy League guy, and is hired by this family, wealthy family, to go to Europe to get their son back, who is played by Jude Law. And then Tom Ripley kind of gets obsessed with the Jude Law character. His name is Dickie Greenleaf, and he's basically falling in love with him, because Tom is gay, but he's kind of, this takes place in the 50s, I think, or early 60s. So he's kind of like, he's got a lot of repressed sexuality, but he's also kind of a creep and has like this weird obsessive mind. And so it's a thriller basically about obsession and about kind of like these forbidden desires and the structures of American society and class and all of that stuff. And I think it's a really, really entertaining and exciting, and actually I find it also a fun movie. I think it's a movie that wasn't so appreciated back when it came out, even though it got a couple nominations and stuff and did well at the box office, but it has gained a bit of a reputation. I've seen a lot of people talking about it more now and really appreciating all the stuff that it's doing. I watched it for the first time this year, and I thought it was really
Oh,
interesting, and it has a
cool.
great cast.
Yeah, it has a great cast. It is a beautiful looking movie. I found it just too slow for the pacing didn't work for me.
Mm.
But I can understand what you're
I
saying.
can see that. It's a 3-hour movie. I think the length works for me just because the movie kind of keeps uh, transforming into different things. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like it's the same thing, but it kind of like shifts and then shifts again. Um, but yeah, I think everyone's so great in the acting. Matt Damon, you have Jude Law, Gwyneth Paltrow, Kate Blanchett, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's I recommend
Yeah.
it. I think it's a really cool movie.
Cool. Great. So my number 7 is by Grapthar's Hammer. I choose Galaxy Quest is my number 7. This is such a funny movie. I especially love Alan Rickman as Alexander Dane, the the conceited the actor who is in this sci-fi show, this Star Trek spoof show, and it's all sort of beneath him, and he's hilarious in the movie. And it's one of the most quotable movies. I mean, and I think it really captures the it really captures Star Trek, first of all, and is just really funny. And but then also, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, I think it's just funny seeing these actors that all of a sudden now have to actually be their character and sort of save the world. Plus, then you have the big fan of that. They're initially the actors are kind of dismissive of at their sort of Comic-Con type thing at the beginning, and he's the one that, because he knows the show so well, he's able to really actually help them save the day, which is fun. And it's just hilarious in my opinion.
Yeah, I watched this movie for the first time
Uh-huh.
to prepare for this episode, and I agree with you. It's really funny and it's a lot
Mhm.
of fun.
Yeah.
And talk about another really great cast of really funny
Yeah.
people working together.
Yeah.
Alan Rickman, of course, is hilarious, but you have, Sigourney Weaver is in there. Tim Allen is actually, I think, pretty good as in the
Yeah.
lead role. Tony Shalhoub, Sam
Yeah.
Rockwell, Enrico Colantoni from Veronica Mars plays the
Uh-huh.
main alien guy, and I
Right.
think
Yeah.
he's so funny.
Yeah.
And all the aliens in the way that they talk, and this is like sort of parody of Star Trek stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sigourney Weaver's funny in it. Kind of that she's only on the she did only really on the show for her her appearance, and the way they kind
Yeah.
of make fun of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny, and especially Alan Rickman. I just love, he's so good in the role.
It definitely was a lot of fun.
Cool, good. So what do you have at number 7?
Number 7 for me, another, I think, incredible debut feature that is The Virgin Suicides, which is the
Uh-huh.
debut of Sofia Coppola. And it's based on a novel basically about this neighborhood kids who are obsessed with this group of girls. Now I forgot their last name. I'm going to look it up while I talk. But basically, there's these sisters who have this very religious and sort of like repressive parents. Basically, they're the Lisbon girls, and their mother is really doesn't want them to like go out with boys or anything like that. And there's a moment actually when they are like not allowed to leave the house at all, and the
Uh-huh.
kids of the neighborhood kind of are really obsessed with them, and like what are their lives like, and what do they think about, and that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's a really interesting. I think, I mean, I love the movie. I think it's a great balance of like comedy and drama, because it's like kind of like the way that you can look back when you were younger and you can kind of like see the things that were like a little ridiculous that you were doing or like a little
Mhm.
funny, while still recognizing that all the emotions that you were feeling were actual emotions and were valid, which I think it's a very hard line to uh, walk.
Yeah.
At the same time, it seems to me like a perfect introduction to the sort of movie that Sofia Coppola makes, because it's, I feel like her movies are all about like these people who have these inner lives that you can't totally understand, but that makes them really sad, but they're not understood. And that's what these girls kind of represent in the movie, right? And that's what you see in some other of her stuff, I
Mm-hmm.
think. um so I think it's also beautiful. The music's great, it's shot really beautifully, the acting's good. Kristen Dunst plays one of the girls in one of her early roles. I don't know, I really love it. Have
Cool.
you seen it?
I have not seen that one.
Oh,
So yeah.
it's
Very,
very interesting. Yeah, I think you might like it. I love it. I think it's a really cool movie.
very, very cool. All right. So my number 6 is October Sky. And this is old-fashioned filmmaking. It's a family movie, inspirational, true story of Homer Hickam and his friends, the Rocket Boys, that he wants to get out of the coal mining town and coal mining world that in West Virginia, I think. And his father is a coal miner, played brilliantly by Chris Cooper, and Jake Gyllenhaal is Homer Hickam, and Laura Dern has a lovely part as his teacher that encourages him, and it's just really, I just love movies like this, old fashioned kind of movies. Joe Johnson, he's really good at that kind of spirit in his films, and I don't know, I love it.
Great. I haven't seen it actually, but I do like Joe Johnston, so I might want to give it a try.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. It's a good old fashioned
Mhm.
inspirational kind of movie, and yeah, you should definitely check it out.
Right.
What do you have at number 6?
My number 6 is Toy Story 2.
Yeah,
All right. So I don't know. What can we say about Toy Story 2? One of the great sequels, I would say. I don't know. I guess you
yeah,
agree with me.
hmm yeah. I
Yeah.
actually have it at number 5. So
Oh, that's perfect. So let's talk about it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I think it's great. I think it expands on the themes from the first movie and kind of takes them in really surprising,
hmm
like deep places that I didn't expect. When I watched it
yeah.
as a 7-year-old, I loved the movie back then. I watched it over and over again. I had the
Sure.
VHS. Um, but I some of the stuff that was going on there, I didn't even grasp when I was that age. You know what I mean? Definitely. I
hmm
mean, I was really young, but still, like talking about mortality and kind of like that sort of thing in a kids movie. I think that's great. I think that's really daring, and they pull it off.
Yeah, I mean that Sarah McLachlan song. I mean, forget it. That is just amazing. That whole sequence is incredible, and then I also think it's really funny. I still, I mean, it maybe doesn't seem as funny because we get Star Wars spoofed all the time, but when General Zurg says, I'm your father, and that
Hmm.
whole part. I remember when I first saw that, I was dying laughing. I thought that was hilarious, and it is really sweet with Woody trying to kind of figure out what he wants to do with
Hmm.
his life, at least at that point. The only thing I've always said about this one is I kind of miss Buzz and Woody being together. They're sort of separated for most of the movie, but it's really great. I mean,
Yeah.
I love all the Toy Story movies, and this is a great one. And Jesse's such a fun character, and
Hmm.
with real heart.
Yeah. I think this might be my favorite of the Toy Story movies. I'm just really
Mhm.
impressed with everything that they did and how well they managed to
Yeah,
not only recapture the first movie, but mix it up. I feel like even if Woody and Buzz are not together for that long, I really think it's really clever the way they found to have Buzz, with the Buzz from the toy stores. So found a way to
yeah,
have Buzz as he was in the first movie and as he is now,
yeah,
both be in this movie. I think that's just genius.
yeah.
It's a great way to still be able to have that all that comedy be there.
Yeah, and the introduction of Barbie, which is
Mm-hmm.
hilarious, and you have Jodie Benson in it, which is fun because I love her. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great movie. There's no doubt about it. So,
Yes.
very good. So, what do you have at number 5?
My number 5 is a movie called Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a movie by Jim Jarmusch, who is famously hated by Rachel Wagner, but that's okay because I love his movies and I'm here to represent him.
Okay,
Um,
good.
this is a very, very strange movie, or an even stranger when you just are talking about it. It's basically this man who is basically homeless, and I'm pretty sure, even though it's not said outright in the movie, he's also mentally ill. Um,
Uh-huh.
and he's played by Forrest Whitaker, and he lives in a rooftop with all these pigeons. He's kind of one of those pigeon guys,
Uh-huh.
like in Hey Arnold. I don't know if you saw that episode
Uh-huh.
ever, but basically, he works as a hitman, and he lives totally alone because he lives by the code of like the samurai warriors of the past. So he reads this book that has all these like sort of samurai sayings and way of living, and the crazy thing about this movie is that it's kind of an action movie, kind of a thriller, and kind of a drama, but also a comedy. And that's kind of what I love about this movie, but also Jim Jarmusch in general, is this idea of mixing genres, and especially mixing seriousness and comedy in a way that it's just not, I feel like you never truly sure if something is supposed to be funny or not. And I think that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but I really love it and I really respond to it because that's kind of the way that I don't know. There's something about the way I see the world in which I see a lot of those things mixing together. So I kind of remember moments in my life that were very dramatic, but I also felt like I wanted to laugh about certain things that were going on, even though I felt very serious in the moment. And things, and the opposite too, that I'm laughing, but I think it's also kind of sad at the same time. So it's a weird mix that I really, really respond to. And I think this movie, because of how original it is, because of all this stuff that's going on, that all these different things that it's mixing, really works that stuff
Very cool. Good.
together.
All right. So my number 4 is the Disney anime film. The other Disney anime film from that year is Tarzan. And first of all, just visually, the deep canvas, which was groundbreaking at the time, is just so beautiful. And seeing Tarzan basically surf through the jungle is just so beautiful. And I actually really like the relationship between Jane and Tarzan and how it develops over time, and they get to know sort of each other's worlds. And I personally, I like Phil Collins, so I like the music. I love "You'll Be in My Heart." I think that's just such a lovely little song, and I don't know. I just think it's a really sweet. I even forgive Clayton as the villain. A lot of people don't like him, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it kind of fits with this sort of the sort of 1930s adventure spirit of Tarzan, to have this kind of sniveling, uh, Tarzan, take me to your home, and I want to steal all the because I think there's sort of a campy spirit about that kind of villain, in my opinion, which makes it fun. And his death is pretty gnarly. And it has some just lovely sequences, like when he first introduces Jane to his family and his tribe, and so yeah, I really enjoy it. So I have it at 4.
All right. I haven't seen Tarzan in a while. It's never been my favorite, but I've always thought it was pretty good
Mm-hmm.
as a movie. Talking about the deep canvas technology, which I agree looks great, and even is even more impressive when you consider it's the first time it was done at all.
Yeah,
And it wasn't like tested out before and anything, and it looks so great.
yeah.
And I don't even know if it's, I guess it's not really relevant anymore now that we have all this 3D animation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it looks really cool, and I wish we had gotten more of that. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then they tried to do it again in Brother Bear, and woo, not my
Did they
favorite.
use it for Treasure Planet too?
You know what? They probably did. You're
For
right.
the ships. I think
Yeah.
I think they might have. And the crazy thing is that it looks best in Tarzan. The very first time they did it, it's when it looked and worked the best, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
they got a technical Oscar for that
for the
technology.
technology.
Yeah,
Very well deserved because it
yeah,
looks great.
yep.
Yeah, I think it's a fun movie. I don't remember it too well. I remember really, really loving Minnie Driver's performance as Jane. I think she does a really great work.
Yeah.
Voice
Yeah, I
acting.
like her. She's fun and pretty well. I like the relationship between the two of them. It's
Mm-hmm.
really a sweet little romance. So yeah, that's my
All
number
right.
4. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is The Straight Story.
Yeah,
Have you seen this one?
this is a really good movie.
Yes, I really love the Straight Story. Directed by David Lynch, who usually does not make this sort of sweet G-rated movies. He's
Uh
much of a
huh.
darker experimental director. But this is a story based on a true story of Alvin Straight, who's this guy who basically drove from Iowa all the way to Wisconsin to visit his brother when he found out that his brother was sick.
Yeah.
And he drove in a lawnmower. That's the fun part about it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just this. It's like one of the loveliest movies I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with this.
Yeah.
It's just so heartwarming and vulnerable. And I think Alvin Straight, as portrayed by Richard Farnsworth, who
Hmm.
got an Oscar nomination for this movie and should have won, in my opinion, especially over Kevin Spacey in American Beauty.
Agreed.
One
Yeah.
of the most moving performances I've ever seen. This guy
Yeah.
is really, he's both a role model in the way that he is, so determined and resilient about everything and so vulnerable in so many ways. And also, you can see how um, the society of the time that he grew up in has kind of like made him a little bit closed off and
Mhm.
has made him sort of bottled up his feelings and the trauma that he experienced as a younger person. And as an old man traveling to see his brother, he's really able to bring these things up to the forefront for the first time and truly talk about them and connect.
It's a
Yeah.
really good movie. It has such heart, this movie. And I always loved Richard Farnsworth. Because he played Matthew Cuthbert in the 1985 Anne of Green Gables, which is one of my favorite anything ever. I
Right.
absolutely adore that. And he was wonderful there. And he's just uh, just such a great actor and somebody who you always feel such a connection to his characters. And here yeah, he's somebody who is just sort of a quiet man who kind of wants to be left alone a little bit, but there's just such heart to him. And I completely agree with you. It's a really really good little movie.
Oh, great. I'm glad.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Okay. So my number 3 is Notting Hill. So this movie, I think is just such a great romantic comedy. I am Hugh Grant. Probably it is Hugh Grantiest. I mean, he's just so lovable in the movie, in my opinion. And Julia Roberts. I mean, she's playing a movie star and she does a good job at it. But there's a vulnerability to her character, and I still, when he does the horse and hound I mean, that still makes me laugh. I think that's hilarious.
Hmm.
And I love the scenes the whole scene when he takes her to dinner at his friends. I think that
Oh,
whole
yeah.
scene is so authentic and feels like a real group of friends really just talking to me. And I also just a little tiny part about the movie, but I love the fact that one of his friends is in a wheelchair and it's not even a thing and she's just a person. And I love that's just a little thing. But
Hmm.
and then the ending, or I'm also just a girl standing in front of a boy. I mean, get out of it. It's so good. And I think they do have really nice chemistry. and I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think it's good too. Yeah, it's a fun movie. I think they're both really great. I agree with
Yeah,
you, Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts, I really don't know if any other actress at that time could have played that role and done a better job. I think she was
yeah,
just it had to
agreed.
be Julia Roberts to be able to pull off this sort of thing, that kind of superstar, charismatic,
Yeah,
person.
I agree. Yeah, and I mean, it's just such a fun role for Hugh Grant, like him
Hmm.
being this foppish bookstore owner, kind of is.
Definitely at his huge Grant Diest, like you
Yeah,
said. It's like he's definitely like going all in into all of the
yeah,
stuff that I guess some people would find annoying, but like
yeah,
his fans would find perfect.
yeah. Love it. I love it. So there. What do you have at number 3?
My number three is Being John Malkovich, which
Mm-hmm.
is another debut for director Spike Jonze and
Uh-huh.
for writer Charlie Kaufman.
Yes.
And this is just one of the most, we were talking about original movies before. I just don't know how you come up with this idea for a movie.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how you fill up the details around that idea in this way. It's just so weird and original. And one thing, it's one thing after the next. Everything is weird about this movie, which is basically sort of this puppeteer played by John Cusack who finds a portal into John Malkovich's head.
Yeah.
And he works, and that's just the beginning. He works at this like office that is in the, I think it's 7.5 floor, which is like
Yeah.
a little floor between two full floors, so everyone has to be like crouched down. And then he has this wife who is a veterinarian and has all these animals in their apartment. It's just a crazy movie,
Yeah.
and it's just very funny, and it's also very interesting, I think, to think about in the context of 1999. I think it's a much more honest and interesting exploration of sort of like men in crisis than like American Beauty or even
Yeah.
Fight Club would be, right? I feel like those movies kind of pull their punches a little bit. They are not willing to go there. I think the character played by John Cusack in this movie is so despicable, and in such an honest way of like all the resentment that he has and all the entitlement that he has and how he longs for this girl and the wife and all of this. I think it goes to really honest places and really daring
Yeah.
places while being a crazy, movie. John Malkovich is great
Yeah.
playing himself in this movie when he
Yeah.
goes in the portal with the
Yeah.
Malkovich. I think
Yeah.
that's great.
That's
Um,
probably the highlight of the movie is the Malkovich. In a way, it's almost kind of a female empowerment story too,
Definitely.
between these two women, and that their connection is through each other, but through John Malkovich, and yet
Yeah.
they're both sort of getting revenge of the men in their life through doing this. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's also so interesting about talking about the things that people find attractive and how
Yeah,
weird they can be, right? This
right.
woman who falls in love with this other woman, but only when she is in John Malkovich's body, which is like this very, yeah. Catherine Keener plays one of the women, and I think she's
Yeah,
also great. I think she does such a great job of playing this kind of cipher of a character, and she gives her this like really weird life. Yeah.
yeah. I agree. I think it was really. I watched it for this, and I thought it was really funny and clever, and not because sometimes movies I feel like can be sort of crazy and out of the box for the sake of being crazy and out of the box,
Hmm.
and they don't kind of have the story to match
Yeah.
up to it. Like I admired the gumption of Swiss Army Man, but for me, I felt like it was kind of, it didn't have the, I don't know, I didn't love it personally. I thought it
Hmm.
was sort of being crazy to be crazy, and this I think is much better. as far as just executing a really interesting
Yeah.
story with interesting characters. And yeah, you got to give John Malkovich huge points. I'd love to know sort of his thoughts when he first read it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would be really interesting.
The thing. I can't believe, speaking about this, I cannot believe he did not get nominated for an Oscar for this movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Because the movie did get a couple nominations, and I just can't see how do you not give Best Supporting Actor to John Malkovich, let
right.
alone not nominate him at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, for sure. It was really fun. And it's definitely very Charlie Kaufman, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
my favorite that I've seen of his. He's always a challenging guy, which I do appreciate. So yeah, this was fun. I enjoyed it.
Great.
Yeah, very good. All right. My number 2 is one of my favorite comedies. And it has seriously gotten me through some really tough times of my life. Is the movie Office Space. I just think this movie is so funny. And, I've had definitely times where I was in sort of, for lack of a better word, job hell, where I just hated my job and I was in this. And this movie was seriously something that I could always put on and I would just die laughing. And I love everything about it. I love his whole strategy for how he's able to get like maybe 20 minutes of work done the whole day. I love his interviews with and I love Michael Bolton. I think that's hilarious in it. I love when they destroy the the fax machine. Who hasn't wanted to do that in for a printer or some kind of that just drive you crazy. His just being frank with the Bobs, I just think is so funny. And it's very voyeuristic for me. It's very like because before when I didn't work from home, it was just I just to me it's the worst. And I love Jennifer Aniston in it. I think when she finally flips out about the wearing the flare and she's like the Nazis wore flare. And I love the fact that their whole plan came from Superman 3, and I think that's really funny, and I just love it. I think it's hilarious. So
Yeah, I watched this last night in
yeah,
preparation, and I also thought it was really funny.
yes,
Yeah, I almost paused it and didn't finish it because I was thinking, my wife is currently working in an office, and I was thinking, she's talked about so many other things that frustrate her, and I was thinking, I have to see it with her. I can't finish this. She has to see this. But yeah,
the
really fun
TPS
movie.
reports and when you're working in that kind of office environment, how you have to do these things that it's just like the only I love when he's like the only reason that I get anything done is just have less people bothering me.
Mhm.
Thinks and he has like 7 bosses and
Yeah. And
it's
oh my God, that's the thing I could relate to the most, the cubicle thing, or the fact
yeah.
that anyone could walk up to him at any moment and they'll let him do his work. That's the thing that
Yeah.
stresses me out the most when, yeah.
I love when they have that birthday party and and he's like, maybe if you can if you're lucky you'll be able to get seriously harmed and injured and, and all your dreams will come true. Uh, and then he's like, after when he's like scaling a fish and his thing like that's really funny. And yeah, I'm glad you liked it because humor is so subjective, but I I just think it's hilarious. So there you go.
All right.
So what do you have at number 2?
Number two. Sorry. Number two for me is Topsy Turvy,
Uh-huh.
directed and written by Mike Leigh from the UK. And this is basically a movie, historical movie, I guess.
Mm,
And so this, on one level, this speaks to me because I am a theater person. So I am a playwright and a director for theater, and I have a theater company and things like that. So I really, I think this is one of the most accurate and realistic depictions of theatrical collaboration. I obviously haven't worked on the level that Gilbert and Sullivan were working in these huge theaters with big budgets and whatever. Um, but in my experience, this movie does a really great job of showcasing all the stuff that goes into it and the relationships that form between producers and artists and the writer, in this case the lyricist and the musician, and all those sort of things, and the intricacies of those collaborations. And at the same time, I think it is a very interesting movie in the way it depicts Victorian society. You were talking before about Mansfield Park and how some of things that happens in there wouldn't be relatable to us now or wouldn't seem scandalous anymore and that sort of thing. And it made me think of in Topsy Turvy how Topsy Turvy is a movie that is really wants to, I feel like, embody how it was like in Victorian society, right? It's not wanting necessarily to judge these people, even though it recognizes the things that they thought were different from what we think now. And it's also not trying to modernize it and make them feel like people who have the values of our era, which I think happens a lot in period movies. We have like protagonists that act in a way that a person from our time would act instead of a person from that time. And I think that's very interesting about it too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of attention to detail because it's Mike Lee, and the costumes and the sets are all very specific and accurate, and it's also very fun.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get to see it?
I didn't. I couldn't. I had a hard time finding it. Hopefully it'll come to the Criterion channel because it is a Criterion.
It is a Criterion, and hopefully they'll put it up because it's a really good movie, and I think you might like it a lot. I saw it on DVD, so that's why. But yeah,
cool. Good.
it's a lot of fun. Jim Broadbent plays Gilbert, and he's really great. He's really funny, and he's also there's a lot of great performances in the cast.
Cool, good. Yeah, I definitely want to see it. Hopefully, it will come to Criterion Channel. All right, so we're here with the number one. Okay, my number one, you mentioned it as your number 10, shockingly low.
Yeah, it's a shockingly good year. What can I say?
Is The Iron Giant. I love this movie. I think not only the animation is absolutely beautiful, the story is so touching. It has so much heart. It's funny. It's sweet. It's, I don't know, like everything you could want in a movie as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, it's just one of those movies. I can't imagine anyone not liking it. Like, I'm sure there's those people and God bless them, but I can't imagine it. I think this movie is just so good.
So sweet.
Yeah.
It's such a sweet movie. And another Jennifer Aniston movie, who is apparently
right.
your favorite actress from '99.
Pretty much. Yeah, you're right. And Vin Diesel.
Of course,
great.
And Harry Connick Jr. As the mechanic, right?
Oh yeah. And
what's the name of the guy who plays the inspector, the FBI guy or the CIA guy? He's so good.
John Mahoney?
John Mahoney plays the general, and Christopher McDonald plays Kent Mansley. He's so good as the villain.
Yeah. And he is so good. And it's definitely, I mean, you've seen a lot of movies about the child who finds the magical creature, the robot or the alien or whatever it might be, but it's almost always a trope that really works for me and that I almost always really like. And here it's done so well, and I cry when I watch this movie.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, it really works for me. And it's just one of my all-time favorites, one of my favorite animated films ever. So, all right, what do you have at number one?
My number one, All About My Mother, Pedro Almodovar. We made a whole podcast about it over at the Criterion Project.
Yes.
So I don't really think I have to repeat myself. I had much more time to talk about it then. We got really into it.
Yeah.
About what we like about that movie. And so I'll just say that, a lot of the time people say, and this is something that you actually say, quite a bit, Rachel, is you describe a movie as having a lot of heart.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally sure what to make of that phrase. I don't use it very often because I'm not totally sure what people are trying to say with that. But All About My Mother, that's a movie that I would say has a lot of heart. I just feel like it has a love for its characters,
Yeah.
and really all of them, and
Mhm.
respects them and wants to understand them. And I think that's really special.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think maybe when I say it, I just mean it feels authentic. It feels real.
Hmm.
It earns its emotion.
Yeah, I can see that. A
Yeah.
Straight Story is another one that
Yeah,
I would
for sure.
could say that about. Yeah, really movies that are coming from a place of love, I guess, is what we're trying to say there.
Yeah. Very, very, very true about that movie. I'll put a link down in the description to the podcast that we did on it. If people definitely should listen to that. We have a whole new podcast feed for the Criterion Project, which we're really excited about. So you won't see that anymore on Rachel's reviews, but we're excited to start a whole new chapter in that for that podcast.
Definitely.
And it's a it's a really good film. I really enjoyed it, and it definitely made me. It was the second Almodovar movie that I'd seen, and it definitely made me interested to see more of his films. So
Great.
it's very, very worthy choice, I think, as your number one. So let's go over
And
our
I,
list really.
yeah,
Yeah, let's go over our list really quick. So I have number 10, I have Mansfield Park. Number 9, The Matrix. Number 8, Fantasia 2000. Number 7, Galaxy Quest. Number 6, October Sky. Number 5, Toy Story 2. Number 4, Tarzan. 3, Notting Hill. 2, Office Space. And number 1, The Iron Giant. So there you go. Let's go
yeah.
with your list.
I think a pretty good list in both
Oh,
cases, I would
yeah.
say. Yeah. All right, my list is number 10, The Iron Giant. Number 9, Election. Number 8, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Number 7, The Virgin Suicides. Number 6, Toy Story 2. Number 5, Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai. Number 4, The Straight Story. Number 3, Being John Malkovich. Number 2, Topsy Turvy. And number 1, All About My Mother.
Very good. Well, this was really fun. I really enjoyed doing this. And so if you're listening, let us know what your favorites of 1999 are. Maybe you like a little underdog like Phantom Menace. Maybe, who knows? Let us know in the comments. That would be really fun to talk about. Or on Twitter, share with us your thoughts of what we've talked about. So, Conrado, how can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. That is at Coco Hits New York.
Great. And you can find me, Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes and YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So make sure to check that out. And thanks so much for doing this. I really have fun with these. And yeah, we'll be excited next year to talk about
what years will come
yeah.
next year, which we'll definitely be back to talk more.
It will be very exciting. So
All right.
all right, we'll talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.